There's nothing like kicking back, having a beer, and watching fundamentalists lose their minds when we don't tremble before their legalism and bad hermeneutics. Pastor Bruce of First Works Baptist Church decided to respond to my video where I show Christians can drink alcohol. And boy, is it a doozy.
And one of these individuals in particular is the so-called inspiring philosophers.
I have never called myself that. My channel is Inspiring Philosophy. You need to do better research next time.
Let me just start off by saying that obviously this guy has a drinking problem. And the only reason I say that is because he's literally drinking as he's making this video.
Let me get this straight. You saw me drinking in one video and you immediately jumped to the conclusion that I have a drinking problem. And you don't want people to think you're irrational and make arguments on insufficient data? Legalists often resort to these kind of tactics when they don't have real arguments. They did the same thing to Jesus when he drank alcohol. In truth, I'm drinking because it's the topic of the video, it's not sinful, and I know it'll trigger fundamentalists like this guy into saying irrational things and resorting to character assassination.
And in fact, in the video that he made, he states, I can drink about 2 to 3 beers within a 2-hour span and only be buzzed. But you kind of wonder how much alcohol does he drink off of camera to build up that type of tolerance.
This just shows how little he knows about alcohol. It takes the liver roughly 1 hour to process one drink. So if I had 3 beers over the course of 2 hours, that would be like having 1 drink in me. They did not have any modern technology that would have prevented the natural yeast from turning the sugars into alcohol. By the time the grapes would have been picked, crushed, and turned into wine and transferred to a wedding in Cana or a Passover celebration, the natural yeast in the warm climate would have turned it into alcoholic wine.
So for someone who's a beer connoisseur like himself, he seems to know little to nothing about the fermentation process, because anybody can tell you, any winery can explain that it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for wine to ferment to become alcoholic.
This is a weird error for him to make because he's confusing the full fermentation process with the natural fermentation process, which starts on day 1, turning these sugars into alcohol. It doesn't magically turn into alcohol after 4 weeks. It's turning the sugars into alcohol every day through that period. And in the ancient world, we know the fermentation process at times would only last for a few days. As Emlyn K. Dodd said, thus the initial fermentation process could last anywhere from a few days to weeks. Again, you cannot confuse the full fermentation process with the natural process. If you were to drink juice after 1 day in a warm climate, it would have some alcohol in it.
Genesis chapter 40 begs to differ, because we have a story in Genesis 40 where Pharaoh's cupbearer takes grapes, presses them into Pharaoh's cup, and gives it to him. But of course, I'm sure we're expected to believe that Pharaoh waited about 4 to 6 weeks for it to become alcoholic so he can get a little buzzed, right?
You're talking about something that didn't happen. That was a dream the cupbearer had. And I never said they could not just drink juice. My point was if they were going to transfer the juice without fermenting it to a wedding in Cana or to a Passover celebration, the natural yeast would have already turned the sugars into alcohol. This is why John 10 directly uses a verb that refers to people getting intoxicated. Jesus didn't turn water into grape juice.
Out of 231 times that the Bible mentions wine, that we're expected to believe that it's just never referring to juice. I mean, come on.
Yeah, because if it was juice, they would have called it juice and not wine. And you reinterpreted it as juice to fit the conclusion you want instead of letting the text speak for itself in places like John 2:10 or Deuteronomy 14:26, where it's clearly talking about a strong alcoholic drink. Why would Paul prescribe grape juice to help with Timothy's stomach in 1 Timothy 5:23?
Well, I got a better question. Why would anybody prescribe alcohol that is a known toxin for any type of health benefit? This is obviously a delusional person who thinks that alcohol is good for you.
Oh my goodness. Here, let me Google that for you. It is well known that wine does have benefits when you drink in moderation. And every commentator I can find, from Craig Keener to very conservative theologians like John MacArthur, will tell you 1 Timothy 5:23 is about drinking alcoholic wine because the Jews and the Greeks used wine for medicinal purposes to kill bacteria. Galen and Hippocrates prescribe wine to deal with infections. Again, the scholars are pretty clear on this. The ancients used wine as a disinfectant, not fresh grape juice.
I quote Song of Solomon 8 verse 2 where the Bible says, I will give him of the spiced wine of the juice of my pomegranate. And instead of addressing the fact that it talks about juice, something that he claims does not exist in the Bible.
I never said that. You're just making things up now. I pointed out wine in the Bible is alcoholic.
And instead of addressing the fact that wine and juice in that verse are used interchangeably, something that he claimed does not exist in the Bible, he just proceeds to mock me, make fun of me, saying that I don't know the metaphorical meaning behind it, and oh, honey, and all these things.
Lighten up. It's a joke.
This is simply a red herring to distract the viewer from the fact that he cannot address the fact that juice is used in the Bible and that juice and wine are used interchangeably.
Be honest. Did you check this in the rest of Song of Solomon? Because not all the metaphors are meant to be used interchangeably. Song of Solomon is filled with metaphors being used back to back that are not meant to refer to the same thing. For example, chapter 6, verse 11. I went down to the nut orchard to look at the blossoms of the valley to see whether the vines had budded, whether the pomegranates were in bloom. Pomegranates grow on trees, not on vines. They're not saying pomegranates grow on vines. They're using various metaphors to describe their fun nighttime bedroom activities. In chapter 8, they're saying it's like juice, it's like wine, it tastes good. The metaphors were referring to something else, not meant to refer to the same thing in the metaphors themselves. Also, in the ancient world, they had fermented juices. So how do you not know juice in the Bible is always referring to non-alcoholic juice?
So he claims that I'm ignoring the context, but it seems that he's just ignoring the fact that I gave an example in the Bible where the Bible refers to wine as juice being found in the cluster of a grape. You don't find 12 to 14% alcohol content in a cluster of a grape.
So I actually looked more into this, and you missed something. The word that is used in Isaiah 65 to refer to new wine is actually a different Hebrew word than the word that is typically translated as wine in the Bible. The word in Isaiah 65 refers to fresh wine and probably has little to no alcohol in it. But the Bible typically uses a different word to describe wine. This other word is used in Proverbs 23, the verse that you cited, and it's also used in Deuteronomy 14:26, which tells Israel they can obtain it. So, by that logic, Israel was allowed to obtain alcoholic wine.
The Bible says, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright, referring to the fermentation process.
You cannot take this literally, because by your own logic, it would be sinful to even look at wine, which is absurd.
Yeah, it's absurd to a wino. It's absurd to a Christian who is probably an alcoholic who likes to drink on a daily basis.
Drinking on a daily basis, which I don't do, is not equal to being an alcoholic. Do you not understand the medical condition of alcoholism? And what is absurd is not the Bible, but your eisegesis of this text. By your own logic, it would be sinful to look at alcohol. Shield your eyes, your soul is in danger! In truth, Proverbs is using metaphorical language to describe the life of someone who parties too much. Alcohol does not literally bite like a serpent, and it's not sinful to look upon it.
So what I was addressing here is the fact that people will say, well, it's okay to drink a little bit, just not to get drunk, because once you become drunk, then it becomes sinful. And then I give the example in John chapter 2, where the Bible literally says, after men had well drunk, that Jesus Christ gave them the 6 pots that were filled with water that was turned into wine. Now, I obviously believe that that's referring to juice, not referring to alcohol.
Again, that doesn't make any sense with the passage, because John 10 uses a verb that always refers to people drinking or getting intoxicated. You don't get intoxicated from grape juice.
Then he immediately follows up with saying, oh, by the way, here, that word means intoxicated. So what he's insinuating is that when the people had well drunk, that means that they were well intoxicated, meaning that Jesus Christ gave them 6 more water pots filled with alcohol to become even more drunk.
Look, that's what the Bible says, whether you like it or not. We have to let it speak for itself, not force it to say what we want it to say. And that word just refers to them being intoxicated or under the influence. It does not necessarily mean they were wasted.
What other sin in the Bible does God permit for you to do just a little bit?
This is called begging the question. You're assuming that alcohol is a sin to begin with, instead of letting the Bible speak for itself and clearly shows that we're allowed to drink alcohol. And too much of a good thing can become a sin. For example, it's okay to accumulate some wealth, but if you turn that into an idol, it becomes a sin. It's okay to enjoy food, but do not partake in gluttony. So once again, guys, enjoy your alcohol in moderation. Bad hermeneutics is certainly not going to stop me.